Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Tech Talk with Bill Baer. My name is Dan Holme. I'm the CEO and co-founder of IT Unity, and we're here once again to share the latest and greatest updates on SharePoint 2016 and Office 365. And I'm joined today by Mr. Bill Baer himself, Senior Technical Product Manager from Microsoft on the SharePoint team. How you doing, Bill?
Great. How are you doing, Dan? It's good to
I'm
see you.
doing awesome. Good to see you too. And we're also joined today by special guest Barry Jinks, CEO of Colligo. Hey Barry, how's it going?
Hey, how you doing? Hi, Bill. Hi, Dan. How are you guys doing today?
Fantastic.
Doing
Fantastic.
great.
It's nice to have the little Pacific Northwest trio or duo over there. It's been,
Well, I think it's a little easier for us since we're not in Hawaii at this point in
yeah,
time. It's a little early.
it's early today. That's the flat hair. So, and to everyone who's been a fan of the show, sorry we missed you 2 weeks ago. The good news is Bill Baer was actually on vacation, and he was over just behind me on the island of Molokai while I was in Amsterdam for Unity Connect. Did you have a good time here in Hawaii, Bill?
Absolutely, absolutely. Unfortunately, ended a little. It was a little more brief than I was hoping it would be, but I'll get back for my biannual sabbatical.
Right on. Got called back to the mothership early, huh?
Yep, work to be
Well,
done.
that's good. That means there's a lot happening. Did you have any brainstorms about SharePoint 2016 while you were in Maui? Did you decide to add the Hula service or anything like that?
No, no, I didn't think of SharePoint at all, which was beautiful.
That's wonderful. That's a hard thing to do sometimes when it's your job. So let's start with an update, Bill. So it's been a couple of weeks since we've talked. How's the IT preview of SharePoint 2016 progressing from Microsoft's perspective?
Oh, it's going great. We're seeing a lot of interest and a lot of momentum around IT preview. If you kind of look at it in comparison to SharePoint 2013 when we shipped our first beta 1 back in July of 2012, we're seeing effectively the same amount of momentum, at least in respect to the number of downloads that we're seeing of IT preview, as well as some of the corresponding collateral visits to TechNet, downloads of other IP that we sim shipped with the IT preview release. So we're seeing a lot of traction around it. We're seeing a lot of people get interested in it. Obviously IT preview was more centered on some of the infrastructure aspects of the product. So particularly amongst our IT professional audience, we're seeing a lot of that. And for those who are just looking to experiment with new software from a hobbyist perspective that are deploying with Windows Server 2016 or the community technical preview of that, as well as SQL Server 2016, and just getting their hands on with some of the different points of integration that we built into that particular version. And then, we're still working towards our goal of shipping a release candidate as well later this year, and that would effectively kind of be the final beta before we begin the long march towards RTM.
Fantastic. So I assume you're not ready to tell us when that release candidate might actually hit the wires.
No, not yet, not yet. So there's still a lot of work that we want to be able to do. One of our key focus areas, at least in respect to these releases, is not to necessarily try to meet an arbitrary date, but really release it when we feel it's of the quality that we want to release. So quality has been a big focus. So in the past we used to build a lot of moments around a lot of these releases, and this time our real focus is let's make sure that we have sufficient quality before we even release it to our audience. So that's kind of what we're focused on as we move towards release candidate, is just getting those aspects or areas of the product right, and then letting our audience take over it. So it's exciting, though. It's coming along, and we're still on schedule to release it this year. So
Wonderful. That's great news. And just before you went on vacation, you had shipped the Office online server, the bits for the cloud search service application. And have there been any other releases or announcements that have happened in the time since we chatted last that you'd like to share with the community?
There wasn't a whole lot of activity, in the span of that couple of weeks. Really, what we wanted to be able to do was there's there's a lot of products that work well together. Obviously, we released IT Preview, and then about 2 weeks following the IT Preview release, we announced availability of both the Cloud Search Service application preview as well as Office Online Server preview, and then packaged within those releases was also the SCOM Management Pack preview for System Center Operations Manager for use with SharePoint 2016. So then, that's kind of a tidal wave of technology that we shipped, at least related to Office Server. So, we really wanted to give our audience an opportunity to experience those without inundating you with yet further releases. And like I said, a lot of people are still working on getting it deployed, figuring out what it can and can't do. User voice is obviously picked up. That's one of the great aspects of this, because we are feedback driven. So, it's difficult to give feedback if you don't know, what we're doing. But now that we've shipped IT Preview and we've shipped Office Online Server Preview, we've shipped Cloud Search, we're seeing more and more volume in user voice now, because now people have a baseline through which they can start to provide feedback. And we're going to see that again with Release Candidate. And customers will download it, they'll experiment with it, they'll either see things that they wanted or they'll see things that they wanted that aren't there, and then they'll use user voice to really drive that feedback into our product groups as well. And then obviously we've got a couple of milestones coming up in the next couple of weeks. Starting next week, we have our MVP Summit. It's going to be great to bring that audience out to provide that next level of feedback to us and our engineering teams while here on campus, and see some of the work that we've been doing up to date, both on premises and in the cloud, and then obviously in between through hybrid. And then beyond that, we'll be traveling to Stockholm for the European SharePoint Conference yet the following week, and we've got a keynote there where we'll talk a little bit, at least in respect to vision and strategy as we continue to drive forward throughout this year and the next.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to spending quite a bit of time with you over the next 2 weeks there, Bill. And that keynote in the ESPC you mentioned is going to be one of Jeff Tiefer's first big public keynotes since he's returned to the SharePoint team, right?
Yeah, indeed. So ESPC was kind of the first event, SharePoint-centric event that garnered a relatively substantial audience since Jeff has come back. So it's a great opportunity for Jeff to reintroduce himself to our community, share what his thoughts are and his direction and his thinking around the way we see SharePoint moving forward. So it's an exciting opportunity all around to be able to come in and share that information as early, as we can. Which this was kind of that first event that gave us that opportunity to share that information early. Otherwise, we'd be waiting for Ignite or another broad community event somewhere in between.
That's awesome. Well, and obviously one of the things we're here to talk about today is mobility and mobile content management in both SharePoint 2016 as well as the current versions and in Office 365. I'd like to get some feedback from you guys on that topic. Before we do, I'd like to point out to everyone who's watching two things. First of all, if you have any questions for Bill, Barry, or myself, just use the questions pod that is part of the GoToWebinar control panel, generally docked on the right-hand side of your screen. So we'd love to get questions from you. Secondly, Bill, you mentioned User Voice a couple of times. For the folks on the show who haven't been to User Voice and seen that User Voice channel, can you give us the URL to the SharePoint channel on User Voice?
Yeah, sure. Just visit sharepoint.uservoice.com. And within there, you'll see a SharePoint server node, and you can filter. If you haven't signed in, you can obviously view a lot of the user voice feedback. You can filter by top 10, and then one of the key things to pay attention to is once you're at that particular URL and you're looking at some of the feedback that we've already received, one of the great ways to see what we're doing is just filter it by the top 10. Those are obviously representative of the areas or suggestions that have garnered the most votes in respect to what our audience would like us to do the most. And then over to the right of each of those entries, you'll notice that we update those periodically to show various statuses, whether we're working on it, we're thinking about it, or perhaps it's not something we're investing in at this time. So a good way to understand the way that we're thinking about the product, between IT Preview and Release Candidate, and obviously between there and RTM, is to look at those areas of feedback that we have there. So if you see something that's marked "we're working on it," then we're working on it, and you'll know that it's going to come in a upcoming release. If it's something we're thinking about, that means that we've received the suggestion. It piqued our interest, and now we're doing the work to figure out how we would resource something like that, or how capable we're at, barring any constraints, to be able to deliver something like that in the near future. So there's a couple of different ways that you can look into that and start to understand. You can almost think of it as a roadmap to a certain extent, especially based on the ones that we know we're working on and we've marked them as such.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you for sharing that. And then Barry, welcome back. Do we have your voice as well? Can we do a quick audio check? No, you are muted, Barry, so you might want to click that microphone button in the control panel.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
There we go. We can hear you now.
Good,
welcome back. Perfect timing. Just about to ask you a question about changing to the topic of focus, mobility. And that is, when you look at the way people work today, and they're using mobile devices, and they're, working away in a more dynamic, as Microsoft likes to say, dynamic teams world, how does that actually change the way people share information and want to collaborate? What are you seeing out there, sort of taking a big step back and looking at the industry as a whole as the trends in that space?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question, Dan. It's kind of interesting when you think about it. Really, the true smartphone wasn't introduced until about 8 years ago. It's now part of our lives. It's part of everybody's lives. Most people carry multiple devices. I think I've seen surveys where the average number of devices that an individual carries now is 2.5 or something. I don't know what a half device is, but so if people are carrying multiple devices, they're expecting smart devices. They're expecting to be able to use tablets and smartphones. And it is just embedded in the way we work, and that's pretty crazy when you think it's as I said, it's been 8 years. It's a high expectation level of people for a great user experience, and they are getting spoiled, if you will, by the great consumer apps that are coming out. And there's a very, very high expectation that the kinds of capabilities in the enterprise will match those that they can get in the consumer world. And so it's an exciting opportunity to provide those kinds of capabilities in the enterprise world. It's also a huge challenge to make sure that you can get user adoption and that the tools really satisfy the needs of users today.
That's awesome, and I completely.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah,
well, then I want to build the same question. I certainly see what Barry's saying, and you clearly have to at Microsoft, especially with cloud first, mobile first being almost the mantra these days. What do you guys see from your perspective, and how has it actually impacted the development of and the vision of Office 365 and SharePoint?
Yeah, I think if to second what Barry was saying is, devices have effectively become ubiquitous, and if you look back at trends just a few years ago, really the way that you accessed information was largely by virtue of the desktop browser. And if you think about to where we're at today, the desktop browser has almost taken on a different function, whereas information access is largely driven through applications now. A great way to think about it is, even on the consumer side, if you look at a lot of the technologies today that used to be driven, by the browser, and even something as common as Facebook now, most of the application access is through a smartphone and through an application, not through a browser. The other thing too is, in the past, the browser is what tethered you to your office or your home office, and now through applications, you've gained greater mobility and the ability to take that information with you on the go, to work anywhere across devices and screens. You look at technology such as Continuum or others that enable you to work across a mobile device as well as a desktop and really have that experience seamlessly transition from one to another. So, like I said, the mobile device has become more ubiquitous. The phone has become secondary, really, and what you have is a portable computer in your pocket that has the capability to make a phone call.
It does?
Yeah, so
Wow,
So,
I didn't know I could make calls on this thing.
so and that's kind of the way that the way that it's not really the technology that's evolved as much as the way that people are accessing information that's evolving at a very rapid clip. So now if you put that in context of Office 365, you can see that we've generally taken that product in the same direction. So some of the first things that you notice is, hey, we introduce Office 365 groups. And the next thing you know, we land an application that drives a group's experience. We introduce Delve, and accompanying that Delve release is a Delve application. So Sunrise and Wunderlist are great examples of mobile acquisitions that we've recently made. And it's just by virtue of the way that people access information now. It's largely app-driven as opposed to browser-driven. It doesn't mean it's, by far, it's not the end of the browser, but, on mobile devices, applications provide, the perfect logical way of taking information on the go or accessing, functionality that may reside somewhere else, be it on the consumer side or even the enterprise side. And then, coming back to what Barry said, is because most of this has been driven by consumer technologies like Facebook, like Twitter, and then even technology such as Photoshop and Illustrator and Lightroom also have app companions as well. So, the natural instinct today is arrive in the office, you should have a very similar experience to what you've experienced in the consumer side as well, and that kind of seconds what Barry's seeing as a trend as well, which is that expectation that these consumer experiences are equally capable in the enterprise as well when it comes to the applications that they use on a day-to-day basis to get their work done.
Does that mean that within the SharePoint and Office 365 team, then, that when you're thinking about a new capability and a new feature that's going to deliver business value, that one of the first questions that's asked is, what's the mobile experience going to be? Is that early in the process now, and what you guys are doing?
Absolutely, I would say that it's very early in the process now. So it's not it's not something that happens on the tail end of what we do. And mobile comes in one of two factors or form factors. One is delivering a mobile experience in respect to making sure the application itself is responsive via the browser. So that's to address screens. Whether on the largest monitor in your office to the smallest screen that you may have in your pocket to somewhere in between with a tablet. So there's kind of the responsive design element of mobile, and then beyond that there's enabling access through applications. So that's the app aspect as well. So there's a number of different ways to think about how we think about mobile. It's not just building an app, it's building a responsive application to work across screens as well as delivering an application to drive greater mobility.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I would say that the design aspect of apps has really changed in the last few years, in the last 5 years, and as Bill mentioned, talked about responsive design. I would also say that there's an expectation of purposeful design. When people use an app, they expect it to do what they want it, what they need it to do, very, very simply, easily, without a lot of clutter. And apps that are the Swiss Army knife apps are gone. And that's something that's also happened in the last 4 or 5 years. People just aren't, they don't want an app that's loaded with thousands of features that you got to dig deep to find. They want to be able to press a button, get to what they need to get to, and use it right away. And it's a very, very different expectation on the part of the user for productivity these days.
Absolutely. And so, Bill, on the Microsoft side, how have some of these things directly impacted SharePoint 2016? What are some of the new features that are going to support mobile workers more effectively with SharePoint 2016?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways it comes in a number of different ways. Sorry, I was tangled up over here. It comes in a number of in a number of different ways. Obviously, the first thing that we did was the low-hanging fruit. That was the accrual of some of the cloud innovation back to on-premises through Touch App or the mobile web UX. That if you access 2016 on a mobile device, you'll get directed to that mobile UX that's representative of some of the work that we did in OneDrive for Business in Office 365. Now, obviously, we've also carried forward a lot of the mobile investments from 2013, or effectively all of them, which is device channels and other functionality. So beyond that, again, that's not representative of everything that we're going to do. That's representative of low-hanging fruit that made its way into IT Preview. And then we continue to think about how we've addressed these experiences. Now, if you move even beyond that to hybrid, that's where you really gain the greatest mobile advantage. And the reason I say that is if I configure the new cloud search service against my on-premises 2013 or 2016 environment, and now I have my index unified in Office 365. As a result of that, that begets Delve. So now you have the Delve experience available to you as well. What that means is that exactly. So the Delve app is capable of providing you that hybrid result set as part of your Office Graph experience as well. So if you think about, mobile, there's a great mobile experience that we anticipate delivering for SharePoint 2016. And there's an even greater mobile experience that gets delivered through hybrid, because now that you are unifying your information or centralizing your information and you have this aggregate view, all of those great recent app innovation, the recent app innovation in Office 365 becomes available to you as well. So Delve, obviously is just one of, example of one of those, and kind of that. And the way that I look at the cloud search service is it's indicative of the next generation of hybrid investments. That's really that foundational pillar that we started working on, that all of our future work will be based on kind of the same patterns and practices.
That's awesome. And just to shine a light on some of the hints you've dropped there, because I hear this discussion in the community a lot right now, and I don't think it can be emphasized enough that the IT Preview is not the finished product, and you still have some surprises up your sleeve between now and general availability next first half of next year, right?
Oh, absolutely. So IT Preview, again, was one of those things. When we build a product, the first thing that we have to build is that product's foundation. It's almost building, it's almost like building a car. It has to be built from the ground up, or really anything else. So you have to start with a solid foundation, and then you can begin to build on top of it. So, if we would have built the product on a weak foundation, it'd be akin to building, a weak foundation for a house and having it topple over once too much load's put on it, or once the expectations grow too high for that particular house. You exceed its capacity rating. Well, at the same thing, the way we thought about SharePoint 2016 is if we work on it from the foundation up, we establish a rock-solid foundation through which we can continue to grow that product. So it was really starting with a great base and then building on top of it. So incrementally, what you'll see is it's almost like a like a wedding cake. It's we're working in layers here, and we've got a big layer on the bottom, and then we continue to add layers on top until you reach the peak, and that peak will be the first half of next year when SharePoint becomes generally available.
That's awesome. A lot of metaphors there. And Barry, your customers are on the cutting edge of mobility, and they're sort of living examples of cloud first, mobile first. Are you seeing a lot of? Are you seeing a significant shift into hybrid and also perhaps even into dedicated cloud in your customer base over the last couple of years?
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt. We've seen in fact, we've seen a phenomenal shift in the last year. So you guys might know we introduced an administration product on Azure last year, which is obviously 100% cloud-based. And when we first introduced it a year ago, we have, our customer base is very diverse. We have customers who are in aerospace and defense, oil and gas, higher education, consulting, so healthcare, so industries that are a bit concerned about security, obviously. And when we introduced the product a year ago, there was a fair amount of resistance. I would say that people were saying, "Oh, we're interested, but we're still trying to evaluate our cloud strategy." In the last year, it has just changed completely. Every single customer we have now is considering and/or using cloud as part of their IT infrastructure. Office 365 obviously is the major player there for them because we're in the SharePoint world. So it's really exciting what's going on, and of course with cloud comes the ability to create great mobile experiences. The ability to be able to have people all over the world connecting to the data source. With single sign-on capability. It makes it much easier for people to get access to that, an Active Directory integration. Makes it much easier for people to sort of have that really cool experience that is not, now there's no big barriers to it, but still very secure. So it's happening in a big way, and our goal as a company, and I think Microsoft's as well, is to make sure that when people move to that hybrid, and there's going to be data that's going to be on-prem, especially in the industries that we deal with, but the idea of being able to have part of the workforce and some of the data on the cloud and an increasing amount on the cloud, that hybrid experience, but making it so that the user doesn't have to understand necessarily that some of it's in the cloud and some of it's on-prem. It just happens seamlessly between the two. That's a really key design element for us, and I know it is for Microsoft as well. So really making that cloud transition easy for the end users so they get engaged, and of course make sure that it's still rock solid, secure, and monitorable and manageable through that transition.
That's interesting that you say that, because I've seen that too. This last 12 months has been an enormous shift in just the whole psyche and attitude about the cloud. It's been very interesting to see. Yeah. And obviously Microsoft is a little bit ahead of the curve as far as helping pull us there. And OneDrive for Business was, I think, one of the tipping points on the Office 365 suite that really got people thinking about the cloud for more than mail. Bill, tell us a little bit about OneDrive for Business. I know we just saw the release of the announcement of the release of the new generation Sync client. So it's a new day for Office 365 and OneDrive for Business. How is Microsoft going to be differentiating itself from competitors in that enterprise file sync and share space?
Yeah, I think when we embarked on this journey of enterprise file share and sync and elected OneDrive for Business to really establish the foundation for those investments, it was a double-edged sword. So if you think about in the past, OneDrive for Business is effectively the evolution of the MySite, all the way from personal sites in Portal Server 2003 through the MySite era, through the SkyDrive Pro era, and then OneDrive for Business. And along that journey, various ways of accessing information in OneDrive for Business or MySites came along with it, predominantly through the use of Groove. And then Groove started to provide that foundation for a sync client, and we recognized, that there obviously were issues from a sync perspective, particularly with the Groove engine. So, the Groove engine provided a great scenario for intermittent connectivity, for temporary offlining of information, and then bringing that information back. But for real-time connectivity, we had to rethink the way that we wanted to address that particular scenario. So obviously that's what introduces us to the next generation sync client, and at the same time continually involving that web client, the web UX at the same time. And you've probably noticed in Office 365 that web UX has become much better, much more responsive, both in respect to speed as well as its ability to handle a variety of screens. And then it's become much more aligned to what you see in the consumer UI. Now, with that said, kind of what differentiates OneDrive for Business are some key things. One is obviously hybrid. That differentiates it because it enables you to adopt the cloud on your own terms. You can establish a set of your user base or a subset of your user base to use OneDrive for Business in the cloud, whereas the other set may use it on-prem, and that could be for a variety of reasons: corporate or regulatory compliance, maybe data sensitivity concerns. Perhaps they want their researchers to remain on-prem, but their sales staff to have that real-time connectivity. Now, beyond hybrid, it's also its points of integration suite-wide. So OneDrive for Business, unlike a lot of the enterprise file share sync clients, isn't a discrete standalone service that has no affinity to anything else offered by Microsoft. And that's kind of one of the key areas to think about with OneDrive for Business, because it participates in all of the great SharePoint functionality around document management and records management and compliance and governance that a SharePoint site would. And then at the same time, it also inherits a lot of the great capabilities in Office 365, such as machine learning, predictive analytics. Groups, obviously, are driven by SharePoint in OneDrive for Business. So it has tentacles, and those tentacles tie into a number of different technologies across the Microsoft stack, and particularly within Office 365. So not only do you get a consistent experience from an IT control perspective, because all of those controls are based on the foundation that has always existed to govern information in SharePoint. But beyond that, you also get a lot of the great new cloud innovation, and all of that accrues itself to OneDrive for Business. So it's not just you're syncing files and taking files on the go. It's that you're getting a lot of this added capability as well. So the Delve experience, the groups experience, all of the IT control, the Unified Compliance Center, and more. Modern attachments by virtue of Exchange. So you can see and you can start to add on all of these different things that come with OneDrive for Business. So when you think about OneDrive for Business, it has a function, file share sync. And that's a small piece of what it can do. And there's so much more that it can do because it ties into so many different areas of our service.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bill, you mentioned Exchange, and one of the features I love about Outlook 2016 is the modern attachment that you mentioned. And for those of you who haven't seen it yet, effectively, when you go to send a file attachment in Outlook 2016, it biases you to actually use OneDrive, which is wonderful. And so when you're sharing a file with a team, rather than sending a version that gets forked and edited by 10 different people, you're actually sending them to OneDrive for Business where they can collaborate. The new co-authoring is really great. That's one of my favorite features. And email is I think one of the big challenges I think we all have with mobility, because it's the first mobile app, right? That people have been mobile for decades, sending files back and forth with email. And how is and Barry, I'm going to toss this one to you first. How is the email experience really change? How is the email experience evolving within your customer base? And how are they using email, or either more or less or differently than before?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting because a recent Osterman research study of a few thousand major companies came back with the conclusion that the top 1 and 2 ways that people share files are: 1, email, which is 97% of the people, and SharePoint, number 2. So you've got in email and SharePoint, or Exchange and SharePoint, you've got the number 1 and number 2 ways that people share files. Now, what's interesting about it is, email is a messaging platform, and it's ubiquitous. You can get a message to anybody in the world pretty well through email. Whereas, the file sharing technologies tend to be a bit more closed. Obviously, they're being opened up as much as possible, but they're still, not ubiquitous everywhere. So what we're finding is more and more customers are looking to figure out a way to integrate email and SharePoint / Office 365 in a single user experience, what we call a single pane of glass. The idea that you can get files, so one of the features you were mentioning earlier, the idea that you automatically or you intuitively can attach a link from OneDrive into an email. That kind of technology where it's the two things are married together. They're in the user's mind. These are one system. Emails about messaging and sending things to people who aren't necessarily part of your internal network, and of course SharePoint, Office 365 are things about people who are part of your existing network, whether they're in the company or not. So those two technologies really need to be married together. I think a few years ago there was the thought that file sharing is going to replace email, and that hasn't happened. And any studies I've seen, email, particularly business email, and the interesting thing is a lot of people don't recognize that consumer email is actually dropping, or at least it's flat. Business email is still rising as a technology. The number of emails being sent for business is actually still increasing dramatically, and that's because it's still the central hub for how people collaborate. So marrying those two things together is really key to creating a great user experience.
And Bill, you mentioned one of the ways modern attachments that email is changing Office 365. What else is changing on the Office 365 and SharePoint side related to the email and the mobile experience?
Yeah, I think you can look at it a number of different ways. So email used to predominantly be defined by messaging, and then over the course of time, SharePoint was defined by content, and then there were discrete products that that drove social, and that was conversation. What you're seeing with email, from an evolutionary perspective, in Office 365 and elsewhere, is that email is becoming content, conversations, and messaging. And groups is a great example of pulling together all of those experiences and unifying them. Because typically what happened is, a great example is the one you gave with attachments, is an individual would send an email with an attachment, that attachment would become forked, and that thread would become forked. And then some unfortunate soul had to become the human conflict resolution engine to try to recompile that particular document. On the side, there was a conversation happening, and that was a social conversation perhaps around that content. So what you have is you have content and conversation, and then you have the message aspect, which was the genesis of this whole experience. If you look at something like groups, and groups is an example of how email is evolving, because it pulls together the content, the conversation, as well as the messages associated with it. So now you have a unified container for files by virtue of OneDrive, and that enables co-authoring and versioning and all of those different things that a human would have done in the past. You have conversations which occur directly in line within that particular group. So it's really taking, the best of content management and the best of Exchange distribution lists, to oversimplify it, and pull them together into one singular experience, and evolve it around the way that people use technology today. And and then obviously we sprinkled in a mobile application for groups as well. So you have a groups application. So that's the mobility aspect of taking the content, the conversations, and the messages with you on the go for anytime, anywhere access.
And I love groups as an example of sort of the new Microsoft approach to ubiquitous computing, which is you've got conversations, content, notebooks, a planner now. You've got all these different capabilities being pulled in from across the Office 365 suite. You've got them exposed in the browser, and then you also have them exposed on apps, and you also have them exposed in Outlook, where so many people spend their days. So you can get to the same functionality around the context of your work from any one of the tools that you might use. And I mentioned, I've given Outlook a few shout-outs here, Barry, but I got to say, one of the things I love about your tools is the ability to tie SharePoint and Outlook together and email together in some really interesting ways. For those of you who haven't seen it, one of the things that Engage does is when you receive files, which is a very common scenario as well from outside your organization, and you need to share it with a team, you can just drop it into your SharePoint document libraries. Which is ridiculously cool, and add metadata to it and all that sort of stuff. So these, go ahead, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, I was gonna mention that we've got. I don't want to preempt a product announcement we have coming up, but one of the biggest, I would call that kind of the email, what we call the email management scenario, where you're trying to integrate emails into the document flow and make them part of a project or case. Sometimes it's for collaboration purposes, but quite often it's for records management purposes as well. The ability to be able to store that, structurally store it, and put a retention schedule on it. But make emails part of the regular flow of information. So one of the things that's been holding that scenario back a little bit is this whole mobility thing. People you don't just save emails into SharePoint on their desktop. They want to do that on a mobile device, and so we have a pretty interesting announcement coming out in a couple of weeks at the European SharePoint show, where we're going to be talking about how to do that in a truly mobile way with a single pane of glass. So watch for that announcement. But yeah, it's a big part of our strategy going forward.
Very cool. And when people are taking these files and this content and these conversations everywhere with them, that's got to raise customers' concerns about governance and security. How do concerns around governance really affect how organizations are managing content for mobile workers, Barry?
Well, absolutely. You have kind of an interesting, say, confluence of two major forces clashing at the moment. You've got this consumerization where people want to be free and easy and use content on any device, get access to it anywhere, anytime. But you've also got increasing threats, hackers and security concerns. Plus, the legal requirements, the legal risk requirements around this stuff is going up. Lawsuits are getting more prevalent, and so this is creating a real problem for IT to sort of how do we we marry these two problems? Or one might be an opportunity to improve productivity through mobile, and the other one's a problem around information governance. How do we marry those two things together? And clearly, we have a solution for that. Others do as well. The idea of the mobile content management platform, which engages, where you can you have apps that are very easy to use, free and easy to use, single pane of glass kinds of apps that make users engaged. But behind that, there's the administrative capability that we've built on Azure that allows you to monitor, to manage, to push out policies, and to be able to report on what activities are happening with users. So to really govern that information. There's a lot as well in SharePoint and Office 365 for sort of managing and monitoring governance as well. So kind of marrying those two, usability and governance together, is a really key thing that needs to be done today to sort of satisfy the next wave of IT requirements.
Yeah, exactly. And Barry mentioned some of the investments that are being made in Office 365 and SharePoint around governance in this mobility space. Bill, what are some of the really sort of key ones that you're hearing are resonating with customers? What are they seeing in that governance space?
Yeah, I mean, so as Barry said, one of the beauty parts about mobility is that unto itself is the aspect that you can take information with you no matter where you're at, no matter what device you're on, and you can effectively work from anywhere, anytime. And that's great. And most of that occurs on a mobile device like a phone. The unfortunate aspect of that is the mobile device is something that tends to get left behind. So, you ask yourself, how frequently would you have left your laptop laying on the top of a bar somewhere and walked out and went home? And that's very infrequent. One, because you're likely not going to bring your laptop and sit at a bar with it. Or number two, the device itself takes up so much real estate, it's almost hard to forget. You lose your keys, but you rarely lose your car. Now, at the same time, with mobile devices, is that that's something that is frequently left laying on a coffee shop table. Falls out of somebody's pocket. If it's not falling in the toilet, it's falling somewhere else. So what you have is mobility has unfortunately almost increased the surface area for bad actors, because a mobile device has become so ubiquitous. It's not just a consumer device; it's a consumer and business device, which means sure, you have some pictures of some palm trees that you took at some place. That's great. You're not worried about somebody taking that. But then all of a sudden you realize you have all of your business information on there as well. And that's what most enterprises are looking for, is how do I safeguard myself when my users can take information on the go in a form factor that's easily misplaced. And that's where mobile device management has really been the key concern of organizations. The first thing that they ask about is what is your MDM strategy? I need to be able to protect these mobile devices. I need to be able to remotely disable those mobile devices, wipe those devices, locate those devices. So again, in the past, when you lost your phone, your biggest concern was that now I'm going to have to figure out who all my contacts were and put them in my new phone. And my pictures, okay, I had some pictures on there, but I'll get them back later. And many people, with the more archaic phones of the past didn't take many pictures anyway. But now it's not just replacing the personal information that you've lost; it's the business having to figure out not how to replace the information that you lost, but what information did you lose, and what did we potentially open ourselves up to? Was it proprietary information about a new product release? That could have changed it. Was it something about our upcoming IPO? So there's so many damaging things that can be carried around in your pocket. And like I said, and unfortunately, for some reason, these devices get left behind at a high degree of frequency or lost at a high degree of frequency, and that's where MDM is probably one of the most important things I've seen with organizations.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, I would just add one more thing as well, is that in addition to the inherent concern or capability to leave a device behind, you've also got changing social norms and demographics in the workplace where people are in some sense that they shun the whole security idea. Bill mentioned, you've got business and consumer stuff on the same phone. Well, I think a few years ago the idea was, well, we're going to completely cordon off this data and this capability. And when you're on your office phone, you can't take pictures of your kids at the baseball game. Well, people just aren't going to do that, right? So you've got this mixed environment where you've got your personal data and your business data on the same device, as Bill mentioned. People do stuff like, I want to email something to somebody. Well, it's on my device. I'll just email it to them. They have no idea what that email service is. Maybe they actually, their default provider is not the secure email provider of the company, and now you're emailing it out through some insecure service, and you're emailing a confidential document. So it's the social side of this as well that needs to be managed, and tools can help that. But yeah, there's a lot of risks these days that can be managed, but you got to think.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think one of the things I'm excited about for Office 365 particularly is I think email, the ability to host email online got a lot of people going initially. Then OneDrive for Business helped drag some of the SharePoint Online customers into the cloud. I think MDM and the Enterprise Mobility Suite in Office 365 is the thing that should drag every business into Office 365. I think if a business isn't starting to look at EMS and saying, how do we use this to achieve exactly the goals we two were just talking about, they are really missing out on a very important, A, opportunity, and B, a chance to really mitigate the risk of their data on these mobile devices. I think this is a space Microsoft, it's Microsoft's to lose in this case. Microsoft has a great story. And one of the other messages that came out in our discussion at Unity Connect a couple of weeks ago, which I think is really important for folks on the show to be thinking about, is it's no longer enough just to secure systems. What is important is to secure the information, regardless of what system that's living in. And that's what's really at the core of MDM or EMS, is that idea that the information is secure, not just from a permissions perspective, but from a usage perspective, regardless of what system that information traverses through.
Yeah, and I think one of the keys to that is treating information as almost as people used to think about a device. It's managed, it's trackable. We have customers, for example, that are they're using SharePoint Office 365 as a document distribution system, and they have very heavy requirements to audit how that information, who actually has that information. An example of that would be a customer, an aviation customer we have, that's sending out flight manuals, and every month the FAA requires them to prove that they have the latest information on that in that cockpit. So you need to be able to track that and audit that information and say, you know what, pilots synced that information 3 days ago, so it's up to date according to the regulations. So there's a whole bunch of new problems / opportunities that are created by this sort of moving to this electronic information distribution world, that things like MDM and things like our Azure tools can help to monitor and manage, but doing that at the information level, not just at the device level.
And Barry, you just mentioned a specific customer, and I think that leads to a question I'd love to ask since both of you are here. We've got Microsoft, we've got a great partner in the ecosystem. Bill, let me turn to you and sort of ask you, when Microsoft is looking at the industry and looking at what needs it can tackle, you obviously can't do everything. We'd like you to, and we complain if you don't, but you can't. How does Microsoft look at its relationship with the partner ecosystem these days, and how do you work together to ensure that Microsoft is doing what it can do with the resources it has, and that partners are then able to take it across the finish line for some of these scenarios?
Yeah, I think one of our strengths has always been extensibility, and that's always been the strength of any product we've built. You can date that all the way back to early generations of Windows, and even prior to that, and all throughout our products, whether it's Dynamics or SharePoint, even the Office client, we've always kind of prided ourselves on extensibility, enabling partners to build applications that they can deliver to our users, whether that's an application that rides on the operating system or it's an application within an application that we've already built. Now, the cloud, is the same way. We pride ourselves on the extensibility of the cloud as well, and we continue to innovate to make it easier for our partners to deliver capability on top of that. Now, we can do a lot of things, but like anybody else, we have a finite number of resources that we have to work with, and we have to focus on those things that establish, again, coming back to that foundation logic, that establish that core foundation. And then we can work with our partners to enable added functionality and value add on top of that foundation. So the key is if you build a great foundation, then partners can begin to build the beautiful house that sits on top of that foundation. So really what we want to be able to do is deliver some of that rock solid low-level work so our partners can begin to extend that. Now obviously stuff like Intune is a great example of something that's evolved over time, but again, it can't boil the ocean unto itself. So we look to our partners, and particularly, our partners have great insight to our customers and the different needs of our customers, because they work with either, they either work horizontally across a number of customers, or they work within a specific vertical, and they become fluent in what those customers need. We have partners that have a deep understanding of HIPAA, something that we understand, but probably not at the same depth, because we're not sitting with a pharmaceutical or sitting in the healthcare industry on a day-to-day basis, or perhaps it's with the FAA and aviation, something that Barry may understand at a very high degree of depth. So our partners are kind of that conduit into the customers, and they're able to build on that foundation to deliver across those verticals. And then it's an important as well, because as Barry talked about cultural norms, that have changed. If you think about just a few years ago, or even today, people still wouldn't write down their name, address, and phone number on a piece of paper and then stick it under the windshield wiper of every car in a supermarket parking lot. But they have no concern about making that public via social media on the web. So it's kind of funny the way that people perceive digital information versus written information. You don't mind giving your bank account, to every agency that you make a purchase from, but you wouldn't leave your credit card anywhere. And when you do, you become concerned about where your credit card may be. But at the same time, you'll shop online at just about every given store. Some of them that aren't even maybe trustworthy. But it's kind of funny the way that people perceive digital information or providing information digitally versus providing information in print. And maybe it's because there's something tangible to print that heightens their level of concern. So if you had a top secret book that was 400 pages thick, leaving it somewhere, you'd immediately recognize the threat associated with that. But sharing it online or leaving it on a phone seems to take on a different aspect, as if the phone provides a higher degree of security than anything else would. So it's kind of funny the way that people perceive the way that information is distributed. If it's in print or it's in physical form, they generally protect it more than if it's not. So for our partners, they can do a great work in focusing on protecting that information in a digital universe.
Yeah, and I would add something to that that's interesting, is that again, it's this dichotomy that's happening today, is that as you mentioned, somebody wouldn't write down their name and address and leave it on every windshield. You'd never have a way of monitoring that in the non-digital, non-electronic world, right? So the beauty is that if we move to electronic documents as the norm, then we can start to manage that in a much better way than we could when things were in paper. So while we're kind of in this muddy world right now where we're making that transition. And there's a lot of tools coming out, as Bill mentioned, MDM being one of them, or Intune. Some of these tools that are really good, and some of the stuff that we're working on, allow you to monitor and manage that electronic information in a much better way than you could ever manage it before.
Yeah, and speaking of third-party tools and what's coming out, Barry, I don't suppose you'll spill the beans about a few of the features that are coming out in Colligo Engage. Give us a little hint before the European SharePoint Conference.
Okay, so I mentioned one thing, and I'm not going to be specific about it, except to say that our
All right.
goal is to provide email management, whether you're at your desktop or whether you're mobile on any device. So that's one of the things we're doing. We're also increasing our support of the we call the briefcase application or the mobile documents application across devices. So we're increasing the number of devices we support there and the number of operating systems we support. Again, all back to Office 365 and SharePoint being the primary place where, or OneDrive where the primary place where data is stored. The other thing we're doing, we're making significant investments in our cloud product, our Azure-based cloud product that allows you to administer, to monitor, to manage data, not devices, as different than an MDM. It's really about the information that you're sending out, who you're sending it to, what are the policies around that information, and then what are people actually doing with it on those devices. You're going to see 3 or 4 new announcements around our Engage platform product, our Engage console. We call it the console. The other thing we're working on, it's not going to be part of this announcement, but it's going to be, we started talking about it at Ignite, and we're going to, in the spring, we're going to actually go GA on this. We're really excited about it, which is a whole software development kit and API around our technology. So essentially our sync engine will be available for anybody to build any kind of custom app. And on top of that, we have a lot of demand from that from our customers. And the ability to be able to build a custom app front end in a very, very short period of time, in a matter of less than a month kind of thing. Build a pretty sophisticated app. Use all of the capabilities of our sync technology to integrate with with data sources like SharePoint and also Exchange. And then use all the governance capability of our Azure platform, our Azure-based platform, to be able to monitor and manage those apps. So in an enterprise context. So we see this, as we move forward, our goal here, and we have a lot of customers that are already doing this, where they are satisfying the needs of different people in the workforce with the same platform, which is really what Microsoft is doing as well with its tools. But the idea is to create a mobile experience in very different areas in the organization. Maybe the legal department, and then the services team, and then over there in the engineering team. All of those groups working together through the common Engage platform to be able to monitor and manage that information. So that's
Very
kind
cool.
of where we're going.
Sounds like you guys are busy, as are you at
We are busy.
Microsoft. That's one of the things I love about this community is we've got Microsoft, which has been making enormous changes, as we all know, towards a cloud-first, mobile-first, service-first delivery. We've got an ecosystem of partners doing great things, and I think anyone who's looking to solve business problems with these technologies needs to be sure that they look not just at the incredible core functionality that's offered within the Microsoft stack, but they look at the exciting things that are happening out there in the partner ecosystem as well. So I'm so grateful that you guys took the time to join us. Barry, it's always wonderful to see you. Hope you have a wonderful morning there up in Vancouver. And Bill, thanks so much for joining us as always. And I will look forward to seeing you Sunday or Monday up in Redmond.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'll see you again in Sweden.
Right on.
All right.
All right. So in the mode of Sweden, we'll say hey do to everyone. And from Hawaii, aloha. Thank you so much for joining us. And we'll look forward to seeing you all on the next Tech Talk.
Aloha, Dan, Bill. Thank you.